The smell of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce should have been comforting, but as I sat at my childhood dining table in our family home in suburban Chicago, all I could feel was the familiar knot in my stomach. My name is Sarah, and I'm 32 years old. This Thanksgiving dinner would be the last time I'd ever sit at this table. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table as always, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expensive watch catching the light from the chandelier my mother had bought 20 years ago. To his right sat my older brother, Marcus, the golden child, with his perfect wife, Jennifer, and their two adorable kids. To his left, my younger sister, Amanda, fresh from her promotion at the law firm, glowing with the confidence of someone who had never known failure. And then there was me, Sarah, the middle child, the one who dropped out of medical school to pursue art, the one whose paintings hung in small coffee shops instead of galleries, the one who lived in a studio apartment while my siblings owned houses in the suburbs. So, Sarah, my father said, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision, still playing with paints? The way he said it, playing, made my chest tighten. I'd heard that tone my entire life, the dismissive chuckle that followed. The way he'd immediately turned to Marcus to ask about his latest business deal, or to Amanda about her cases. I'm working on a commission for a restaurant downtown, I said quietly, hoping maybe this time he'd show some interest. A restaurant? He raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose someone has to decorate the places where real professionals eat. Marcus laughed, that same laugh I'd heard since we were kids. Come on, Dad. Sarah's just finding herself. Some people take longer, right, Sarah? My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass. The condensation felt cold against my palm, grounding me in the moment. Around the table, the conversation continued as if I hadn't spoken. Jennifer was talking about the kids' private school. Amanda was sharing news about her promotion, the familiar symphony of a family dinner where I was both present and invisible. My mother, Patricia, caught my eye from across the table. For a moment, I thought I saw sympathy there, but she quickly looked away and asked Marcus about his golf game. She'd learned long ago that keeping the peace meant staying quiet when my father's attention turned critical. As the evening wore on, I found myself studying the faces around me. When had I become so disconnected from these people? When had family dinners become exercises in endurance rather than celebration? Sarah's been quiet tonight, Amanda observed, though her tone suggested she hadn't really noticed until now. Everything okay? Before I could answer, my father leaned back in his chair, that familiar look of assessment in his eyes. She's probably just tired from all that artistic inspiration. The words dripped with sarcasm. I felt something crack inside me. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 32 years of being treated like the family disappointment. Maybe it was the wine I'd had with dinner, loosening the careful controls I'd built around my emotions. Or maybe it was simply time. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected, I'm thinking about having a solo exhibition next year. The table fell silent. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Marcus stopped mid-chew. Even the kids seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. A solo exhibition? My father's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the skepticism underneath. And who exactly would be interested in your work? The gallery owner downtown thinks my pieces have commercial potential. She's been following my work for months. It was true, though I hadn't mentioned it to my family before. Elena Rodriguez, who owned a small but respected gallery in the arts district, had been encouraging me to consider a solo show. We'd been having conversations about it for weeks. Commercial potential, my father repeated, as if tasting the words. Sarah, you're 32 years old. Don't you think it's time to be realistic about your limitations? The word hit me like a physical blow. Limitations. As if my dreams were character flaws to be managed rather than aspirations to be supported. Robert, my mother said softly, the first time she'd intervened all evening, but he wasn't finished. He never was when he got like this. I'm not trying to be cruel, Patricia, but someone needs to help her understand that not everyone can be successful at everything. Some people are meant to have smaller lives, smaller lives. The phrase echoed in my mind, each repetition feeling like another small death of possibility. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Dad, maybe we should... No, let me finish. My father's voice had that edge it got when he was about to deliver what he considered necessary truths. Sarah, I love you. We all do. But you've been chasing this dream for years now, and where has it gotten you? You're living in a studio apartment, you can barely pay your bills, and you're talking about exhibitions that probably won't happen. The room felt like it was tilting. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white against the dark wood. I'm just trying to help you see reality, he continued, his voice softening in a way that somehow made it worse. Some people are leaders, innovators, people who make things happen. Others are followers, support players. And that's okay, Sarah. There's no shame in knowing your place. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room was on me, but I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, don't be dramatic," Amanda said, but her tone was gentler than usual. "Dad's just..." "What? Trying to help?" I turned to look at her. Really look at her. "When was the last time any of you asked about my art? Not to make a joke or to point out how impractical it is, but because you were genuinely interested?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "That's what I thought," I said, and walked toward the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to think. But as I reached the doorway, I heard my father's voice behind me, low enough that he thought only I could hear it. "You'll always be the loser, Sarah. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." I froze. The words hit me with such unexpected cruelty that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I turned back to look at him and our eyes met across the dining room. He didn't look away. He didn't apologize. He just sat there, as if he'd commented on the weather. That was the moment everything changed. Not gradually, not with careful consideration, but all at once, like a switch being flipped. Standing in the doorway of my childhood home, looking at the man who was supposed to protect and encourage me, I realized I was done. I was done being the family disappointment. Done being the cautionary tale. Done being grateful for scraps of attention and acceptance that never came anyway. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady now, "for finally being honest." And then I walked out of that house, knowing I would never come back. I drove for hours that night, the city lights blurring past my windows as I processed what had just happened. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from my mother, missed calls from Marcus, even a message from Amanda asking if I was okay, but nothing from my father. He'd said what he meant to say, and in his mind, the conversation was over. I found myself parked outside Lincoln Park, staring at the lake in the distance. The November air was bitter, cutting through my coat as I sat on a bench and finally let myself cry. Not the careful, quiet tears I'd shed in private all these years, but the kind of sobbing that comes from 32 years of accumulated hurt finally finding its release. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Sarah, honey, where are you? Your father didn't mean..." "Yes, he did," I interrupted, surprised by the clarity in my own voice. "He meant every word, Mom. And you know what? I'm glad he finally said it out loud. Sarah, please come back. We can talk about this. We've been talking about this my whole life, Mom. Or rather, you've all been talking about me, around me, over me, but never with me." There was a long pause. I could hear the sound of dishes being cleared in the background, the normal post-dinner routine continuing as if nothing had happened. "Your father loves you," she said finally. He worries about your future. He worries about his image," I corrected. "He worries about what people think when they ask about his 3 children, and he has to explain that one of them is still finding herself at 32. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time he introduced me to someone without apologizing for what I do? When was the last time he seemed proud of me for who I am instead of disappointed in who I'm not?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "I'm not coming back, Mom. Not to dinner, not to family gatherings, not for holidays. I'm done. Sarah, you can't just..." "I can. I am. I've been trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely, and I'm tired of trying." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. Over the next few days, I found myself seeing my life with new eyes. My studio apartment, which I'd always felt ashamed of when compared to my siblings' houses, suddenly felt like a refuge. My paintings, which I'd started to see through my father's dismissive lens, looked different now. They were mine. They were honest. They were expressions of something real. I called Elena Rodriguez, the gallery owner, and asked if we could meet. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her over coffee at a small cafe in the Arts District, "about the solo exhibition." Elena smiled, her dark eyes warm with encouragement. "And? I want to do it. I want to show my work." "That's wonderful, Sarah. I was hoping you'd come around. Your pieces have such emotional depth, such authenticity. People respond to that kind of honesty." Honesty. The word resonated with me. I'd been hiding my work, my dreams, my true self for so long, trying to make myself acceptable to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. "There's something else," I said. "I want to change my approach entirely. I want to create a series that's completely personal, raw, real." Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "Tell me more." "I want to paint about family, about the weight of expectations, about what it means to be seen and unseen, about the moment you realize that love isn't always unconditional, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most." "That sounds powerful," Elena said, "and potentially difficult." "It will be," I admitted. "But I think it's time I stopped protecting other people's feelings at the expense of my own truth." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into my work with an intensity I'd never experienced before. I painted until my hands cramped, until the light outside my windows faded and returned. I painted the dining room table from memory, with empty chairs and full plates. I painted hands that pointed and voices that whispered. I painted the weight of words and the shape of silence. My mother called several times, but I didn't answer. Marcus sent a text asking if I was over my tantrum yet. Amanda left a voicemail saying she didn't understand why I was being so dramatic about a simple conversation. But it hadn't been a simple conversation. It had been the culmination of a lifetime of small cuts, of being tolerated instead of celebrated, of being treated like a burden instead of a gift. I started therapy for the first time in my life. Dr. Jennifer Kim, a soft-spoken woman about my age, helped me untangle the complex web of family dynamics that had shaped my sense of self. "You've been living your life in reaction to their expectations," she observed during one of our sessions. "But who are you when you're not trying to prove yourself to them?" It was a question I'd never considered before. Who was I when I wasn't defined by my failures to meet impossible standards? "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been their daughter, their disappointment, their problem to solve for so long that I'm not sure who I am without all of that." "That's okay," Dr. Kim said gently. "Identity isn't fixed. It's something you discover and create every day." As Christmas approached, the texts from my family became more frequent. Guilt-laden messages about traditions and togetherness. Reminders about how hurt my mother would be if I didn't come home for the holidays. But I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt free. I spent Christmas Day in my studio, painting. I'd invited my friend Lisa over for dinner. A simple meal of takeout Chinese food and cheap wine. She was a fellow artist who understood the life I'd chosen, who didn't see my small apartment as a sign of failure, but as a space where creativity could flourish. "You look different," she said as we ate lo mein straight from the containers. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've been holding my breath for 32 years and finally learned how to exhale." "Are you happy about it? The break from your family?" I considered the question. "I'm sad about it," I said finally, "but I'm also relieved." I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, if I just achieved more, if I just became someone different, they would finally see me the way I wanted to be seen. But I was never going to be Marcus or Amanda, and they were never going to value what I had to offer. "Their loss," Lisa said simply. "Yeah," I agreed. "It really is." That night, alone in my studio, I started a new painting. It was a self-portrait, but not the kind I'd ever attempted before. This one showed me as I was, not as I thought I should be, not as anyone else wanted me to be, but as I truly was. Flawed, complex, uncertain in some ways, but also strong, creative, and finally free. January brought new possibilities. Elena had scheduled my solo exhibition for March, giving me 2 months to complete the series I'd been working on. I'd titled it Invisible Presence, a collection of paintings that explored the experience of being physically present but emotionally unseen within family systems. The work was the most personal I'd ever created. Each canvas told a story of moments when I'd felt like a ghost in my own life. Holidays where I sat silent while others spoke, achievements that went unnoticed, dreams that were dismissed before they could take root. One piece, which I called The Empty Chair, showed our family dining table from above, with 4 chairs occupied by shadowy figures, and 1 chair that appeared to be there but somehow vacant, as if the person sitting in it had never fully materialized. Another, Whispered Verdicts, depicted a mouth close to an ear, with the words, "You'll always be the loser," rendered in dark, jagged brushstrokes that seemed to tear through the canvas. The paintings were difficult to create, each one requiring me to revisit painful memories and examine them with the clinical eye of an artist, but they were also liberating. For the first time in my life, I was telling my story without apology, without trying to make it more palatable or less threatening to others. Dr. Kim helped me process the emotions that came up during the creation process. "You're grieving," she explained during one of our sessions. "Not just the relationship with your family, but the version of yourself that tried so hard to earn their approval. Sometimes I feel angry," I admitted, "like I wasted so much time trying to be someone I wasn't." "Anger can be productive," she said. "It can fuel change, motivation, creativity. The question is, what do you want to do with that energy?" I channeled it into my work. I painted with a fury I'd never experienced before. Each brushstroke a declaration of independence from the limiting beliefs that had held me back for decades. My friend Lisa introduced me to other artists in the community, people who had also struggled with family expectations, who had chosen unconventional paths, who understood that success couldn't be measured solely by traditional metrics. "You know what I love about your new work?" said James, a sculptor who had left a career in finance to pursue his art. "It's fearless. You're not trying to make anyone comfortable anymore." He was right. The paintings were confrontational, emotionally raw, uncompromising. They demanded to be seen and felt, rather than simply admired. As word about the exhibition spread, I started receiving unexpected support from surprising places. My former art professor from college, Dr. Martinez, reached out after hearing about the show. "I always knew you had something special," she said during our phone call. "But you seemed so concerned with making everyone else happy that you never let it fully emerge. I'm excited to see what you've created." A few weeks before the exhibition opening, I received a text from Marcus. "Mom's been crying every day. Is this really what you want?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I want to be happy. I want to be authentic. I want to create work that matters to me. If that causes mom pain, I'm sorry, but I can't live my life to prevent other people's discomfort anymore." He didn't respond. The week before the opening, Elena and I hung the paintings in the gallery. Seeing them displayed together for the first time was overwhelming. The collection told the story of a person's journey from invisible to visible, from silence to speaking, from diminished to whole. "These are going to affect people," Elena said as we adjusted the lighting on whispered verdicts. "They're going to see themselves in these experiences." "That's what I'm hoping for," I said. "I want people to feel less alone in their struggles with family, with being seen and accepted for who they are." The night before the opening, I sat in my studio and wrote a statement that would appear in the exhibition catalog. For most of my life, I believed that love was something you earned through compliance, achievement, and the careful management of other people's expectations. I believed that being seen as worthy was more important than being true to myself. These paintings explore the cost of that belief, the way we can disappear even when we're standing right in front of the people who claim to love us. But they also explore the possibility of resurrection, the moment when we decide that our own voice matters more than other people's comfort, the moment when we choose authenticity over approval, the moment when we realize that the most important relationship we can have is with ourselves. This collection is my declaration of independence from the need to be anything other than who I am. It's my love letter to everyone who has ever felt invisible in their own life, who has ever been told they were too much or not enough, who has ever had to choose between being loved and being real. I chose real, and in doing so, I found something more valuable than conditional love. I found myself. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the paintings themselves. The work was just the external manifestation of an internal transformation that had been months in the making. I was no longer the woman who had sat at that Thanksgiving table, hoping for crumbs of approval. I was no longer the daughter who apologized for existing. I was no longer the artist who hid her work because it might make others uncomfortable. I was Sarah, just Sarah. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The gallery opening was scheduled for Friday evening, March 15th. I spent the morning in my studio, not painting, but sitting quietly with my thoughts, preparing myself for what would be the most vulnerable public moment of my life. Elena called around noon to check on me. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I admitted, "but also ready. That's the perfect combination for an artist," she said. "Terror keeps you honest, readiness keeps you moving forward." I arrived at the gallery 2 hours early, wanting to see the space one more time before people filled it. The paintings looked different in the evening light, more intense, more present. The empty chair seemed to pulse with life, while whispered verdicts felt like a scream rendered in color and texture. Lisa arrived first, bringing flowers and a bottle of champagne. "I'm so proud of you," she said, embracing me. "You've found your voice." Other friends and colleagues from the art community began to arrive. Dr. Martinez came, along with several other professors from the college. James brought his partner, a journalist who had expressed interest in writing about the exhibition. As the gallery filled with people, I watched faces as they encountered each painting. Some stood in silence, clearly moved by what they were seeing. Others engaged in quiet conversations about the emotional impact of the work. A few people wiped away tears. "Excuse me," said a woman in her 50s, approaching me near the invisible presence piece. "Are you the artist?" I nodded, feeling suddenly shy despite the crowd around us. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "This painting, it's my entire childhood. I've never seen anyone capture what it feels like to be overlooked by the people who are supposed to love you most." "I'm sorry you experienced that," I said. "Don't be sorry, proud. You've given a voice to something that's usually suffered in silence." Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. People shared their own stories of family dysfunction, of feeling invisible, of struggling to be seen and accepted. The paintings had created a space for these conversations, a permission to acknowledge experiences that were often minimized or dismissed. About an hour into the opening, I noticed a familiar figure near the entrance. My heart stopped. It was my mother, standing uncertainly by the door, looking around the gallery with an expression I couldn't read. She was alone. I watched her for several minutes, unsure whether to approach. She moved slowly through the exhibition, stopping at each painting, studying them with the kind of attention I'd always craved from my family. When she reached whispered verdicts, she stood there for a long time. I could see her shoulders shaking slightly, and I realized she was crying. Finally, I walked over to her. "Mom?" She turned, her eyes red but her expression soft. "Sarah, I didn't know if I should come. I'm glad you did." We stood together in front of the painting, the one that depicted the moment my father had whispered those cruel words to me. The brushstrokes were angry, hurt, but also somehow triumphant, as if the very act of painting them had transformed them from wounds into weapons of healing. "Is this what he said to you?" she asked quietly. "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to protect you." "You could have spoken up," I said, not unkindly but honestly. "You could have told him he was wrong." "I should have. I know that now. I was so focused on keeping peace that I forgot to protect my own daughter." We moved through the rest of the exhibition together, my mother asking questions about the paintings, about my process, about the emotions behind each piece. It was the first real conversation we'd had about my art, maybe the first real conversation we'd had about anything in years. "These are incredible, Sarah," she said as we completed the circuit. "They're painful, but they're also beautiful. And they're so honest." "Honesty is all I have left," I said. "I can't pretend anymore that everything is okay when it isn't." "I know, and I don't want you to." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when I didn't know how to show it." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "That means more than you know." She stayed for the rest of the evening, talking with other visitors, listening to their responses to the work. I watched her face as she absorbed the impact my paintings were having on people, seeing perhaps for the first time that my art wasn't just a hobby or a phase, but something meaningful that connected with others. As the evening wound down, she approached me one more time. "Sarah, I know you don't want to come to family dinners anymore, and I understand why, but would you maybe have lunch with me sometime? Just us?" I considered the offer. This woman who had stood by silently while I was diminished, who had chosen peace over protection, who had failed me in fundamental ways. But also this woman who had come to my exhibition, who had seen my work and recognized its value, who was asking, not demanding, for a chance to do better. "I'd like that," I said, "but things would have to be different. I won't go back to being the person who apologizes for existing. I don't want you to. I want to get to know who you really are." After she left, Elena approached me with a smile. "Well, how do you feel about your first solo exhibition?" I looked around the gallery at the paintings that had emerged from my pain and transformation, at the red dots that indicated several pieces had already sold, at the guest book filled with comments from people who had been moved by what they'd seen. "I feel like I've finally arrived," I said. "Not as the daughter who disappointed her family, not as the artist who wasn't good enough, but as myself, just as I am. That's the most important arrival of all," Elena said. As we turned off the lights and locked up the gallery, I felt a sense of completion. The exhibition would run for 6 weeks, and I knew there would be more conversations, more connections, more opportunities to share my story and help others feel less alone in theirs. But the real victory wasn't the sales or the positive reviews or even my mother's unexpected appearance. The real victory was that I had found my voice and had the courage to use it. For the first time in my life, I was fully present in my own story. The weeks following the exhibition opening brought unexpected changes to my life. The show had received positive reviews in the local arts publications, with one critic writing, "Sarah's Invisible Presence series forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics and the cost of conditional love. Her work is both deeply personal and universally relatable," marking her as an artist to watch. More importantly, the exhibition had opened doors to conversations I'd never imagined having. People reached out through social media, sharing their own stories of family rejection, of feeling invisible, of having to choose between authenticity and acceptance. I realized that in telling my story, I had given others permission to acknowledge their own. My mother and I had begun meeting for lunch every other week. These weren't easy conversations. There were tears, awkward silences, and moments when we both seemed to realize how much distance had grown between us over the years. But they were honest conversations, which was more than we'd ever had before. During one of our lunches at a small cafe downtown, she brought up my father. "He asks about you," she said carefully. "He saw the review in the paper." "What did he say?" He said maybe he was wrong about your chances of success." I felt a familiar flicker of something, hope, maybe, or the old desire for his approval. But it was quickly replaced by something else, clarity. "Mom, I don't need him to approve of my success. I need him to respect me as a person, regardless of whether I succeed or fail by his standards." "I know. I've been trying to tell him that." "Have you?" I asked. Or have you been trying to manage the situation like always? She was quiet for a moment. Both, I suppose. Old habits. I can't have a relationship with him based on my achievements, I said. If he can only see value in me when I'm successful, then he's not really seeing me at all. What would you need from him? To consider talking? I thought about it. An apology. A real one. Not an excuse about being concerned for my future, but an acknowledgement that he was wrong to treat me the way he did, and a commitment to treating me differently going forward. I'll talk to him. No, I said firmly. If he wants to apologize, he can call me himself. I'm done with intermediaries. That conversation stayed with me as I returned to my studio. I was working on a new series now, one that explored themes of recovery and reconstruction. Where invisible presence had been about the pain of being unseen, these new pieces were about the joy of being truly known, by friends, by chosen family, by oneself. A week later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's name. I stared at the phone for several rings before answering. Sarah. His voice was different, less commanding, more uncertain. Dad, your mother said you might be willing to talk. I'm listening. There was a long pause. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not about being concerned for your future, but about how I treated you. About the things I said. I waited. I was wrong, he continued. About your art, about your choices, about who you are. I've been thinking about what I said at Thanksgiving, and I'm ashamed of it. You're not a loser, Sarah. You never were. I was scared. Scared of what? Of you failing. Of you getting hurt. Of you not having the security that I thought you needed. But I realize now that I was defining security so narrowly that I couldn't see the richness of the life you were building. It was more than I'd expected from him, but I found myself still cautious. What changed your mind? I saw your exhibition. I went last week when I knew you wouldn't be there. I saw the paintings, and I saw how people responded to them. I saw that you had created something that mattered to people, something that helped them feel less alone. And I realized that I had been so focused on conventional success that I couldn't see the real value of what you were doing. The painting about what you whispered to me, I said. What did you think of that one? Another long pause. I thought it was the most honest thing anyone had ever created about me. And I was horrified that I had given you that to paint. I'm glad you saw it, I said. I'm glad you understood what it meant. Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of your courage, your talent, your integrity. I'm proud that you didn't let my limitations define your possibilities. I felt tears starting, but they were different from the tears I'd shed in the past. These weren't tears of hurt or frustration, but of relief, of a burden being lifted. I love you, Dad. I always have. But I can't go back to being the person who apologizes for existing. I don't want you to. I want to get to know who you really are, if you'll let me. It's going to take time, I said. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly. I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We talked for another hour. He asked about my art, about my process, about my plans for the future. For the first time in my life, I felt like he was really listening to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to speak. When we hung up, I sat in my studio and looked at my latest painting. It was a portrait of a woman standing in a doorway, but instead of looking backward into a dark room, she was facing forward toward a garden full of light. I had titled it, Choosing Forward. That evening, I called Lisa to tell her about the conversation with my father. How do you feel about it? She asked. Cautiously optimistic, I said, but also clear about my boundaries. I'm not going back to being the person who shrinks herself to make others comfortable. Good. You've worked too hard to become who you are to give that up now. She was right. The months since that Thanksgiving dinner had been the most challenging of my life, but also the most transformative. I had discovered that I could survive without my family's approval, that I could create meaningful work, that I could build relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and obligation. I had learned that love without acceptance isn't really love at all, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. Most importantly, I had learned that I was enough. Not because I had achieved success or proven my worth to others, but simply because I existed, because I had something unique to offer the world, because I had the courage to be authentically myself. The exhibition was ending soon, but the conversations it had started would continue. Other artists had reached out about collaborating on projects about family dynamics and emotional healing. A magazine had commissioned me to write an essay about the relationship between art and personal transformation. I was no longer the invisible daughter sitting at the family table, hoping for crumbs of recognition. I was Sarah, an artist whose work mattered, a person whose voice had value, a woman who had learned to see herself clearly, and to insist that others see her too. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of where it might lead. 6 months after the exhibition closed, I found myself in a position I'd never imagined. Successful, confident, and genuinely happy. The Invisible Presence series had not only sold well, but had sparked a broader conversation about emotional abuse within families and the courage required to break dysfunctional patterns. Elena had offered me representation, and I now had a studio space in the Arts District, a real workspace with natural light streaming through tall windows, not just the corner of my apartment where I'd painted for years. The transformation felt symbolic. I had literally expanded into a larger life. My relationship with my parents had evolved slowly, carefully. My father and I spoke every few weeks now, conversations that felt genuine rather than obligatory. He asked about my work with real interest, and when he offered advice, it came from a place of support rather than condescension. "I've been reading about your upcoming group exhibition," he said during one of our calls. "The theme about healing through art. That sounds meaningful." "It is," I said. "We're working with a local therapy center to explore how creative expression can help people process trauma. I'm proud that you're part of something like that, Sarah. You're helping people in a way I never understood before." These moments still surprised me, but I was learning to accept them without suspicion. People could change, I was discovering, if they were willing to do the difficult work of examining their own behavior and making different choices. My mother and I had continued our regular lunches, and our relationship had deepened considerably. She had started therapy herself, working through her own patterns of conflict avoidance and people-pleasing that had contributed to the family dynamics for so many years. "I realize I failed you by not speaking up," she said during one of our conversations. "I thought I was keeping peace, but I was really just enabling your father's behavior and abandoning you when you needed support. I appreciate you acknowledging that," I said. "It helps to hear you say it. I'm trying to learn how to use my voice now, at 62 years old." She laughed sadly. "Better late than never, I suppose." My relationships with Marcus and Amanda remained more complicated. Marcus had made some effort to reach out, but his messages still carried an undertone of judgment about my overreaction to what he considered a minor family disagreement. Amanda had been mostly silent, though she had grudgingly acknowledged that my art career was going better than expected. I had come to accept that not all relationships could be repaired, and that was okay. I couldn't force my siblings to understand my perspective or to value what I valued. I could only control my own responses and protect my own well-being. The most significant change in my life, though, was the community I had built around myself. Through the art world, therapy, and the connections made during my exhibition, I had found my chosen family, people who saw and celebrated my authentic self, who supported my dreams, who showed up for me in ways my biological family never had. Lisa had become more than a friend. She was like a sister, someone who understood my journey because she had taken a similar one. Dr. Kim continued to help me navigate the ongoing process of healing and growth. Elena had become both a professional partner and a mentor, pushing me to take artistic risks while providing the business guidance I needed. And then there was David. I had met him at a gallery opening 3 months ago. Not my own, but a group show featuring artists who worked with themes of social justice. He was a documentary filmmaker who had been drawn to the same pieces I was studying, and we had struck up a conversation about the intersection of art and activism. "Your work was part of what inspired this exhibition," he had said when I introduced myself. "Elena told me about your series on family dynamics. I'd love to see it sometime." "The exhibition is over, but I have photos of the pieces," I offered. We had coffee the next day, then dinner the following week, then long walks through the city as autumn settled over Chicago. David was gentle, thoughtful, genuinely interested in my perspectives and experiences. He listened without trying to fix or minimize, and he shared his own struggles with family expectations. His parents had wanted him to become a doctor, and it had taken years for them to accept his choice to pursue filmmaking. "The funny thing," he said during one of our conversations, "is that once I stopped trying to be who they wanted me to be, I became much better at being who I actually was. And eventually, they could see that too." "How long did it take?" I asked. "Years, but it was worth it. The relationship I have with them now is based on who I really am, not on some performance of who they thought I should be." David understood the journey I had taken, and he celebrated the person I had become rather than mourning the person I had refused to remain. Being with him felt easy in a way that relationships never had before, not because there was no depth or challenge, but because there was no pretense, no carefully managed presentation of an acceptable self. One evening in late October, as we walked along the lakeshore, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know what I love about you, Sarah? You're the most genuinely present person I've ever met. You're completely yourself without apology or performance. It's rare and beautiful." "I wasn't always like this," I said. "I spent 32 years trying to be someone else." "I know. That's what makes who you are now so remarkable. You chose to become yourself despite everything that told you not to." That night, I started a new painting. It was another self-portrait, but this one was different from any I had created before. Instead of the wounded, searching woman of my earlier work, this portrait showed someone confident, grounded, surrounded by light and color and possibility. I titled it Arrived. The painting would become the centerpiece of my next solo exhibition, scheduled for the following spring. Elena and I were already planning the show, which would focus on themes of recovery, reconstruction, and the beauty that could emerge from choosing authenticity over approval. As I worked on the piece, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. It had started with the worst night of my life, sitting at that Thanksgiving table, hearing my father's cruel assessment of my worth, realizing that I had spent decades trying to earn something that was never going to be freely given. But that night had also been the beginning of my real life, the moment when I stopped trying to be who others wanted me to be and started discovering who I actually was. The process hadn't been easy. There had been loneliness, doubt, financial stress, and the grief of accepting that some relationships might never be repaired. But there had also been unexpected joy, creative breakthroughs, genuine connections, and the deep satisfaction of living in alignment with my values and dreams. I thought about the woman who had driven around Chicago that November night, crying in her car after walking out of her family home. She had been broken, but she had also been brave. She had chosen the unknown over the familiar, authenticity over acceptance, her truth over their comfort. I wished I could tell her that it would all work out, that the pain she was feeling would transform into something powerful and beautiful, that the family members who were willing to grow would find their way back to her, and that she would build a new kind of family with people who truly saw and valued her. Most of all, I wished I could tell her that she was enough, not the version of herself she thought she needed to become to earn love, but exactly who she was in that moment, flawed, uncertain, hurting, but real. Because in the end, that's all any of us really have to offer, our authentic selves, in all our complexity and contradiction. And when we have the courage to offer that gift, we give others permission to do the same. A year and a half after that life-changing Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself preparing for something I never thought would happen, hosting my own family dinner. Not in the formal dining room of my childhood, with its heavy furniture and careful hierarchies, but in my new studio space, which I had transformed for the evening with a long table made from reclaimed wood, mismatched chairs I'd found at various antique stores, and my paintings lining the walls like windows into different seasons of my life. The guest list was carefully curated. My parents, who had both done the work necessary to earn their place at my table, Lisa and her partner Maria, David, who had become an integral part of my life, Dr. Kim, who had become more friend than therapist, Elena and her husband, and 3 other artists from my community, people who understood the value of chosen family alongside biological family. Marcus and Amanda had been invited but had declined. Marcus because he still couldn't understand what he called my dramatic response to constructive criticism, and Amanda because she was uncomfortable with what she perceived as airing family business in public through my art. Their absence saddened, but it didn't diminish the joy I felt in gathering the people who had supported my journey toward authenticity and wholeness. My father arrived early carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, though I couldn't remember ever telling him that. He had been paying attention in ways I was still discovering. "Your space is incredible, Sarah," he said, looking around at the high ceilings, the natural light, the works in progress covering the walls. "It feels like you. Thank you. That was the goal." He paused in front of my latest painting, Arrived, studying it with the same intensity he had once reserved for financial reports. "This one is different from your earlier work," he observed. "Lighter, hopeful." "I am different," I said. "Lighter, more hopeful." "I'm glad. I'm sorry it took me so long to see who you really were." "We both had to learn how to see clearly," I said. "It wasn't just you." My mother arrived with my favorite dessert, a chocolate tart she had made from scratch, and the story of how she had finally stood up to a pushy neighbor who had been asking her to volunteer for every church committee. "I actually said no," she told me with pride. "I said I had other commitments and couldn't take on anything else right now." How did it feel? Terrifying at first, then liberating. "I'm starting to understand what you meant about not apologizing for existing." As the evening unfolded, I watched the interactions around my table with a kind of wonder. These people, some related by blood, others by choice, had created a space where everyone's authentic self was not just tolerated, but celebrated. David and my father discovered a shared interest in documentaries about World War II. Lisa and my mother bonded over their mutual love of gardening. Dr. Kim and Elena fell into a fascinating conversation about the intersection of therapy and creativity. The conversation was lively, sometimes challenging, always honest. When disagreements arose, they were navigated with respect rather than dismissed or weaponized. When someone shared a struggle, they were met with support rather than judgment or unsolicited advice. "This is how family dinners should feel," Lisa whispered to me as we cleared the main course. "This is how life should feel," I whispered back. During dessert, my father asked if he could say something to the group. "A year and a half ago, I almost lost my daughter," he began, his voice steady but emotional. Not to death or distance, but to my own blindness and cruelty. I had spent so many years trying to protect her from failure that I couldn't see how successful she already was at the things that actually mattered. He looked at me across the table. Sarah, you taught me that love isn't about control or judgment. It's about seeing and accepting someone for exactly who they are. I'm grateful that you didn't give up on me entirely, even when I had given up on you. You didn't give up on me, I said. You just didn't know how to see me clearly. But you learned how. That's what matters. Elena raised her glass. To Sarah for having the courage to become herself and helping the rest of us do the same. Everyone drank to that, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. Later, as the evening wound down and people began to leave, David helped me clean up while my parents lingered, reluctant to end what had been a perfect evening. You know, my mother said as she dried the last of the dishes, I keep thinking about that woman I used to be, the one who was so afraid of conflict that she let terrible things happen rather than speak up. She feels like a stranger to me now. She wasn't a bad person, I said. She was just scared and didn't know she had choices. I suppose we're all just doing the best we can with what we know at the time, my father added. The tragedy is when we refuse to learn better. After they left, David and I sat on the couch in my studio, surrounded by the evidence of the life I had built for myself. Paintings that told my story, photographs of people who loved me, books that had shaped my thinking, plants that thrived under my care. How does it feel? He asked. Having them here, in your space, celebrating who you've become? I considered the question. It feels like the completion of something I didn't even know I was working toward. For so long, I thought the goal was to get them to accept me, but it turns out the real goal was to accept myself so completely that their acceptance became a gift rather than a necessity. And now I have both. I have their love and respect, and I have my own. But even if I only had one, I'd be okay. David kissed my forehead. That's the difference between where you are now and where you were before. Before, their approval was the foundation of your worth. Now, your worth is the foundation of everything else. That night, after David went home to his own apartment, I sat in my studio and started a new painting. This one wouldn't be about pain or healing or transformation. It would be about joy, about the simple pleasure of being known and loved for exactly who you are. I thought about the woman who had walked out of her family home on that cold November night, broken and furious and uncertain about everything, except that she couldn't continue living as someone she wasn't. She had been right to leave, right to protect herself, right to refuse to accept cruelty disguised as love. But she had also been wrong about one thing. She thought she was walking away from family forever. What she was actually doing was walking toward a bigger, more inclusive definition of family, one that included people who chose to be there, rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate her. The painting I was starting would show a dinner table, but not an empty chair this time. This table would be full of people, all different, all belonging, all celebrating the radical act of being authentically themselves. I would call it Chosen. As I worked into the night, layering colors and textures, building the image stroke by stroke, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain had been real, but so was the joy that had emerged from it. The losses had been significant, but so were the gains. I had lost the illusion of unconditional family love, but I had gained the reality of chosen family love. I had lost the security of fitting into expected roles, but I had gained the freedom of authentic self-expression. I had lost the comfort of avoiding conflict, but I had gained the strength that comes from standing up for yourself. Most importantly, I had lost the version of myself that apologized for existing, and I had gained the version that celebrated her own presence in the world. The woman painting in the studio that night was not the same person who had sat at that Thanksgiving table, invisible in her own life. She was someone new, someone who had been born from the ashes of that old identity. She was someone who knew her worth, who used her voice, who created beauty from pain, who loved fiercely and was loved in return. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, and for the first time in her life, that was more than enough.